Good morning, buenos días a todos y muchas gracias a los organizadores, la CEOs organizadora. While the presentation is coming, I'll just start giving some words. I'm very grateful for the kind invitation and really congratulations for all the thank you invitation to be here as a guest in this land. And in the conversations that preceded my talk, we heard about ideas about mieux nourrir pour demain, former les chercheurs pour demain, and I want to invite you with this presentation that innovation doesn't need to be only looking at things that are new, that there's good things that might be already existing, and that there are systems that have been sustainable and in community that might be a good example and help as a roadmap for One Health initiatives. So I want to invite you to learn a little bit about the Buen Vivir. How do I make this? All right, so we are currently in this epoch of the Capitalism. And I want to use particularly this word because Anthropocene was used as mentioning that humankind was in charge of all these crises that we were facing. But it's not all human beings. There's particular human beings in the world that are causing most of the changes, and I think that those are driven by the capital. So we are facing a lot of pollution, biodiversity loss, resource extractivism, and these challenges are affecting our economies, our health, our well-being, and they are all interconnected and they exacerbate each other. And one of the underlying drivers of this crisis is land use change. So I think that this topic of the conversation today is really touching on integrating how land can be very important. And to better explain this, I love graphs, and I think that this one can help explain what global land use has been occurring. And if you imagine the Earth, most of the Earth is ocean, 29% is land, and from that, 76% is habitable land. That habitable land, half of that habitable land is dedicated for agriculture, and 80% of the agriculture is for dairy and meat and feed. And that 80%, even though it's most of the agricultural land, it's only producing 17% of world calories and 38% of protein. So most of the proteins are produced by crops, horticulture, vegetable crops. They're producing most of the nutrition, and most of that production is done by smallholder farmers. So if we look at the change of use of land, we see that agriculture is an important factor. And when we're talking about One Health initiatives, I would like us to be very explicit about including agriculture, because we talked about humans and animals and the environment. But most of the changes are occurring because of agriculture. So if we want to start looking at solutions for these changes, we need to recognize first that we have two different ways of knowing, two different or multiple ways of looking at resources and nature, and one that is more anthropocentric, where humans are at the center and they are the agents controlling nature, using as a resource, as exploiting it, and changing and transforming to our benefits for humankind. And we have different ways of knowing where humans are part of nature, where there's interconnectedness, reciprocity, respect for other beings, living and non-living. And I want to plug a big shout out for Ecuador. Ecuador was the first country in 2008 to declare, to give rights to nature. And we are still far away from that in other places in the world. So this brings us to these indigenous cosmovisions, where we were hearing about a colleague from Ethiopia, a lot of sharing together of interpersonal, interconnectedness, respect for biodiversity, for nature. And when we are nurturing this biodiversity, and when we step outside about the individual I, when we see ourselves as a we start to look at a holistic way of health that aligns with One Health. And this is referred to as Utzkaslemal in Maya Mam, Utzilkaslim in Maya Achi. And I share different ways of referring to these values. And again, for our Andean friends, we have the Suma Kausai, Suma Kamanya, there's Nyandereko in Guarani. These different ways of knowing have an underlying social justice. They have a piece of mutual aid and solidarity. And when we start working in our initiatives, we're not looking for our own benefit, but as it was mentioned, to benefit the world, I think that we can make important progress. So I would like to invite us all in a journey, and I would like to take you to my home country, Guatemala, or I'd rather say Guatemala, the land of many trees. And if we were to walk early morning in this tapestry of fields and volcanoes, we would find that farmers are hard at work since early morning, and they are working in particularly their fields. If you go a little bit deeper in their fields, you're going to find a polyculture. It's not a monoculture. Our westernized, I must say, it might not be as efficient, but you notice the corn, the tall corn, the leaves of squash, and the edible, vibrant yellow color of their flowers, buzzing with insects that are pollinating, and then the beans that are growing around the corn. These plants underground, their roots are absorbing water and nutrients, but the plants are not competing against each other. They have different lifestyles, and they are sharing the nutrients. The people in our territories have included the beans and the legumes explicitly because they are a natural fertilizer of the soil. And they're improving this system, and by doing a symbiosis where nitrogen-fixing bacteria are providing the nitrogen and the plants are providing the sugar. So again, this mutual aid within plants, and the beans are not keeping all the nitrogen. They use what they need, but they also share with their companions in the milpa. If you go a little deeper in the milpa, you'll notice that there's other plants there. You wonder, are there weeds? The concept of weeds doesn't exist in indigenous language. These are, on the contrary, welcome plants. Even if they start spontaneously, they are highly nutrient dense, and they are welcome. They diversify our diet. But we might not recognize them because they don't even have a name in Spanish or English or French. These haven't gone through the domestication bottleneck. I was talking to some of you yesterday. When we select for plants, we have selected for specific traits, usually productivity and palatability, the flavor, usually sweetness. So nutrition is here. You know that most of the domestication has stripped nutrients out of our plants. And these plants are not going through severe domestication. They're growing there on their analyze this very ancestral cropping system, we realize that there's a lot of indigenous science, that it's a system that is used efficiently the space, that is providing a diversity of crops, that is sustainable, that is resilient, and providing a strong nutrition. But most of this knowledge is not existent in the books that I learned at the university, and it's currently not mentioned. Usually these cropping systems are referred to as unproductive, archaic, primitive, and all the extension agents come to change. The universities come and how do you make this more productive? Don't you remove these weeds? Why don't you change for this improved variety of corn? So I want to help us all recenter the knowledge of these indigenous people and from the universities and our work to change the way we are training the next generation of researchers and scientists, not only how they do their work in the communities, but how we're teaching on campuses. The science doesn't remain in the field. This science is also found in the kitchens. There's ancestral knowledge in the way that food is produced, and the corn can be eaten in many, many ways, like potato can be eaten in many, many ways in the Andean region. But most of the corn, to make tortillas and to make tamales, needs to go to a process called nixtamalization. And nixtamalization requires that the kernels of corn being boiled with water and in an alkaline solution, usually is calcium hydroxide, cal. It's like rock from mountains, and this rock is dissolved in the water, boiled for 1 or 2 hours, let sit overnight, and then washed 2 or 3 times. And after that, the corn is soft to be able to be ground and to be able to make into tortillas and tamales that we eat 3 times a day, every single day of the year. And not only it's making a structural change, it's also allowing, like making vitamin B3 bioavailable. So Spanish, when they took corn back in their voyages to Spain, they would get pellagra, which is a disease of the skin that is a niacin deficiency disease because they didn't use nixtamalization. That was what indigenous people were doing. And then by combining this corn with beans that appeared in the milpa, we are having like a complete protein that is enriched then with all the leafy greens that appeared in the milpa. So taking like a broader view of the communities, we're seeing that there's a lot of mutual aid within the plants, like there are systems of support. When you look at the communities, there's also a strong fabric, a strong community fabric. And when we are looking right now, and when we learned from COVID that being alone was so bad for our mental health, these communities, when you travel to communities around the world, I'm talking about Guatemala, but this is in all the territories that you might be working, it feels good to be there because people are in community, people welcome you, they slow down, and there's a lot of solidarity and mutual aid in the way they plant. If there's a widow, the neighbors are going to be helping there. They create seed reserves, so it's not just for me, but the community can have an emergency backup in harvest. But they also stop down and ask permission to the land before they plant. They pray for a good harvest. They are grateful. And those, like if you look at neuroscientists and mindfulness scholars, they see just to be thankful is an important element of well-being. So this is something that they are doing continuously. So communality is a term, is a feeling of belonging. something that we strive to in our universities to feel our students get that sense of belonging, and cooperation is important. Maybe that look to the communities and how they're doing can help in that sense. So looking back to a question of how can we establish a life on this planet that provides health, like mental and physical health, while being in balance with nature, I think the answer might inform our initiatives, and we might need to rethink a lot our scholarship. And to conclude, I had a slide that is not meant to be comprehensive. On the contrary, just to start to get our thoughts together, particularly in the reflection of like decolonizing ways of how we are doing our research, in rethinking of ways to recognize that there's different epistemologies, that we need to democratize our research, and we do that by removing that idea of that extractive way of doing research, where we go when we think we're very nice because we talk to people at the beginning, but once we get the data, we return to our labs and our places, wherever those are. We write our theses in English, French, German. We rarely return like useful data. Sometimes a simple thing goes back, but usually we don't have change. That was another thing. How do we make the change? How do we transform this non-extractive research? And for that, we need to think about how we're doing this collection of data to have data sovereignty. Who is in charge of the data that we are collecting? Who has access to it? And then if we're thinking or talking about resources, biodiversity, who's in charge of the seeds, of the fruits, of whatever we are taking from these communities? We need to commit to create participatory research and to be mindful of our work, our role as researchers. I invite us all to have long-term conversations and work with this engagement with the communities, so that we can build more trust, but that we're also more accountable. So I invite you all to think about how El Buen Vivir, this good living, can help by having this underlying social justice, interconnectedness, nurturing of biodiversity, how we can integrate that in our One Health initiatives, and how we can provide the deliverables of our research to the people who are in the front line in the communities, who are doing the policy transformation. And with that, I just want to end with gratitude for all of you, first of all, for your attention to the land beneath our feet, where we're guests right now, but also the land that has informed and inspired these conversations, to the generations that have been before me and the generations that are here alongside with me, the collaborators from my country, from other countries, from particularly the agroecological workers and farmers around the world who have been my best teachers, and to the collective work that we are all doing here